Welcome to episode 170 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined live from the Vault Studio on the beautiful campus of Grace College and Theological Seminary by my good friend, my colleague, my co-host, and the man who hung out with a Various and Sundry podcast listener this past weekend, John Scott Sloat.
Doc, what's happening?
Well, I'm enjoying the fact that there are more signs of spring.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, just it's warmer weather today.
The sun's out. There's some green popping up here and there.
It's over 50 degrees out.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and this week's supposed to be nice.
Good step in the right direction.
Early this week's supposed to be nice. And that's going to get, again, I think I made this point last week about April not being my favorite month because you get these sort of like hints of, hey, here's a day where it's like 60, 65, like it's awesome, sunny. And then you get like 4 straight days of 43 degrees and drizzle.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, I'm no coat today. I brought no coat to work today.
I threw one in the car, but didn't use it. So, yeah, it's a lovely spring-like day.
But to answer your introduction of me, I did hang out with Danny in Ohio this weekend, and that was a blast.
Yeah, yeah. You're a man of the people, John.
I suppose so.
You're a man of the people. You're out there shaking hands, probably kissing babies.
I kissed no babies this weekend.
But yes, but you're a man of the people. I mean, that's part of your job, even.
You make me sound like I'm a leader of the French Revolution. You're just a man of the people, leading the people.
I wouldn't say you're a leader of the French Revolution, but you have very good people skills. You connect well with people, and that's one of the reasons why you're in the job you're in.
Yes. I have a great fake it till you make it mentality, and in some respects I've made it, I suppose.
I guess so. All right. Well, if you would like to reach out to us and see if you can get John to hang out with you.
I'd love to. Most of you.
Find us on Twitter at VNSPod. Email the show, variousandsundrypodcast@gmail.com. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. And once again, we'd love for you to leave us a 5-star rating and a review. All right, John, let's talk some sports.
Let's do it.
So we're recording this on a Monday, which means that the Final Four games have been played, but the championship game is being played tonight. Of course, this episode drops tomorrow. So by the time you're listening to this, you already know who the national champ is. We don't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's San Diego State against UConn. Did you watch either of these games?
I was actually speaking in the midst of these games, so no, I did not.
Well,
during the midst of the first one,
gotcha.
And the start of the second one, and then I went to bed.
Okay, of course.
Shocker.
Yeah, I mean they probably kept you up past your bedtime of like 8:15, right?
It was rough on Saturday night because my wife came with me, and we're just looking at each other, and they're doing like not an altar call, but sort of like a, hey, if something impacted you this weekend, go find a leader and they'll pray with you. And they did that for like 20 minutes. It's like pushing 9:30.
Wow.
And Andrea and I are just looking at each other like, we can do this. We can survive. And Eye of the Tiger starts playing in the back of your mind, and
to stay up till 10 o'clock.
Yeah, to get back to the hotel. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. How's that going to work on your go and counter trip coming up to New York City? Because you're not going to get to keep those hours.
Yeah, a lot of caffeine, a lot of coffee.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And it'll throw off my schedule entirely.
Yes, it will.
Although my co-leader is also an early to bed person.
Okay.
So we may devise the schedule in such a way that in the city that never sleeps, we'll get plenty of sleep.
Yeah. Good luck with that. So the earlier game was the most interesting one, the San Diego State against Florida Atlantic. Very intriguing game. Florida Atlantic led the entire second half until literally the buzzer sounded when they lost. Disappointing, at least in my perspective. I was rooting for Florida Atlantic. But kid from San Diego State hit a game winner. So it was very entertaining.
Yep.
Very entertaining. And then the nightcap was not nearly as entertaining. UConn pretty much controlled that game the entire way, beating Miami by 13. So
yeah. UConn just seems to be hitting their stride at the right time this season, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think, again, our listeners already know whether this came true or not, but I'm expecting UConn to win.
I'm expecting UConn to win, but I'm hopeful San Diego State pulls it out.
Now, see, I'm going to root for UConn.
You're going to root for UConn. Okay.
I'll put this way. I would prefer UConn. Rooting is a strong word.
Really? Why would you prefer UConn over San Diego? You got something against San Diego?
I do.
Really?
I do. San Diego State, not the city.
Not the city.
City's
okay,
fine.
okay.
City's
I wasn't
fine.
sure if it was a blanket sort of thing.
No.
What's wrong with that university?
They are coached by a man named Brian Dutcher.
Tell me about Brian.
He was a longtime assistant for the basketball team for the team up north.
Oh.
And was basically the lead recruiter for the Fraud Five.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So when Steve Fisher, the coach at Michigan who had the Fraud Five, left, he went out to San Diego State. Brian Dutcher went with him. Longtime assistant. He's been, I think, the lead guy now for like 4 or 5 years.
Interesting.
So as Nate from Ohio put it in a private communication to me,
Oh, goodness.
it's got those like shady Michigan vibes going on underneath there. So
you suspect foul play?
I just know that when you're involved in recruiting the Fraud Five and all that went on with them, I wouldn't be surprised if there's
Interesting. I suppose time will tell.
ongoing shady things. Oh, they don't find those things out anymore.
Is that because of name, image, likeness
That's
sort of
part
stuff?
of it, but I mean, look, shady stuff went on at Kansas, and they gave Bill Self a slap on the wrist. Mm-hmm. Like, do you remember this big scandal that supposedly was going to bring down college basketball with all these coaches arranging payments for players and that sort of stuff?
I do.
There was the coach at Arizona, I think, one of the Miller. Is it Sean Miller? I think it's Sean, not Archie.
Yeah, Archie was at IU and Dayton before that.
And so, there were all these reports of, they have these guys on tape basically saying how much they're going to pay for players and that sort of stuff, and nothing's come of it.
Yeah.
So some of that might have been overblown hype. Who knows? But you know that shady stuff happens. And if they just give Kansas a slap on the wrist, where I think Bill Self was, what was it? I think he was suspended like 4 games. Oh, so he doesn't have to sit through the blowout of nobody Western University
At the start of the
season.
Yeah. The cupcakes.
Yeah. Well, that's a real tough – well, you really showed him. That's going to tell him not to, blur lines or anything. So anyway, I'm no fan of UConn either, but so I really don't. I just hope it's a good basketball game. We got to update the bracket is set, right? The competition.
It's over.
It's over.
I think it's been over.
And it wasn't over till Saturday.
It wasn't over till Saturday. Okay.
We have a winner.
Who won? After looking at it last week, going like, there's going to be very little motion here. But
what happened? What needed to happen for there to be movement happened. We have a winner. It's Trent from Indiana.
Trent, our current student, Trent?
Yes.
Oh, boy.
Yes. So we're going to have to get him a signed copy. He's going to tell us what book he wants. But yes, Trenton won. His bracket name, gosh, I can barely read that. Give me my old man glasses. Who's your mama? That's clever. I like that. Finished first. And my son, Jake, finished second. They benefited from getting UConn all the way to the championship game. So that's how they managed to win. So congratulations to Trent. I will see him in class and confirm with him which book he'd like.
Okay.
And we will go from there.
Where did you and I finish?
I think I finished 26th out of 38.
Okay. I believe I tied for 19th. So
I finished 26th.
How many points did you end up with?
Let's see. I ended up with, let me scroll down here. I ended up with 41 points.
I was 43.
Yeah. So I had the same number of points as Danny in Ohio. So there you go.
And first place was 68 points.
Yeah. So low. Like, I'm struggling to remember a year where it's been under 100, let alone that far under 100. Usually somebody cracks low hundreds, you know.
Yeah, I'm trying to – if those numbers were passing grades on a scale to 100, we'd only have 2 people that passed the class. Yes. And not a pretty pass either.
No, not at all. Not at all. So, so congratulations to Trent for winning the Various and Sundry podcast bracket challenge.
Yeah, the third annual?
Fourth. No, there wasn't one for 2020.
That's right. So third.
Yeah, so third. Yes.
Congratulations, Trent. And I believe we've increased the number of participants each year.
Yeah.
Which has been exciting.
Yes, indeed. So other sporting stuff going on. We've had opening day now. How are the Mets doing?
3-1. Okay. So won their first 4-game series, 3 wins, 1 loss.
All right.
Justin Verlander went down with a pulled muscle. So he's going to be out for, I think he's on the 15-day DL.
Okay.
IL. Not the disabled list, but injured list now. We had to change that nomenclature.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
I think all leagues did that. They went to the IL rather than the DL.
Yeah.
The Mets are looking pretty good. We're in, I believe, Milwaukee tonight.
Okay.
Classic place to play start of April, Milwaukee.
Yeah. Lovely this time of year.
I think they have the ability to close the roof on that stadium.
Maybe.
And so I hope they close the roof.
I would think so. NBA regular season winding down. The play-in tournament begins April 12th. So got a few games left. In the East still, your Knicks sitting in 5th place. That looks like they're pretty much locked in. They've got a 2.5-game lead over the Nets with just two games to play. So I think that locks them in. The Cavs are locked in to 3 games left maybe. Cavs are locked in to the 4th spot. And more interestingly, probably in terms of jockeying for position, is the West, where So
Lakers are on the rise.
Here's the thing too, like the top 6 avoid the play-in tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Lakers have moved up to 7th, and they are just a half game behind the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah.
So, and then let's see. Yeah, it's just there's so that space between like 6th and 11th is jam-packed.
Can we talk about the Kings real quick?
Sure.
And not really. It's not really about the Kings, but
they're the 3rd seed in the West.
Yes, when they clinched. Do you listen to the Dan Patrick radio show at all?
I don't.
Okay, so Dan Patrick radio show, sports personality, right? Has been for years. Comes up with a stat of the day. 4 minutes into his show, so by 9:04, he's throwing out this stat of the day, where he goes, with the Kings clinching the playoffs, they were basically the longest playoff drought in professional sports. Now the longest drought in professional sports, do you know who that belongs to?
In professional sports? Is it the Jets?
The New York Football Jets. 4 minutes into his show, we're not even in football season, he's saying this.
Yeah.
4 minutes. That dude hates the Jets.
Well, I mean, is your new general manager, Aaron Rodgers, going to do anything about that?
He's not even on the team yet. We're still waiting for him to come in.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well,
the New York Football Jets with the longest playoff drought in professional sports.
Okay. Well, bully for them.
And Jordan in Indiana texts that to me the minute it happened. That's how I know what time Dan Patrick said that.
There you go.
My goodness.
There you go. Let's see. Anything else? I think that's it on sports. You got anything else? Well, there was a little bit of buzz around the women's NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
Final Four and championship game.
I enjoyed watching. I didn't watch any of the games, but Caitlin Clark highlights.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Best shooter in college basketball. Is that fair?
Well, certainly in the women's game. But yeah, I mean, she's shooting from Steph Curry range at points and knocking down shots, and a lot of the conversation revolved around her and her historic run, and also around in the title game the atrocious officiating, which I watched a good chunk of that, and yeah, the officiating was awful, just awful, embarrassingly bad. And then also some dust up with some trash talk between one of the LSU players and that sort of stuff. Which
I did see some of that. I did hear about that.
Which just makes me roll my eyes. Whatever. And of course, because we live in the age we live in, race has to enter the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Because one of the players was white and one of the players was black, and so you get all those dynamics.
And therefore, that's the only dynamic going on in their interaction.
Of course,
that's it.
That's it. That's the list. So, anyway, that's probably even more than I wanted to say about that. So, you ready to move on?
Sure.
All right. Since this is the week of Easter, we are talking resurrection today, and I think we can start by acknowledging that really as Christians, every Sunday is Resurrection Sunday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's the whole reason we meet on Sundays to worship,
and even particularly in the morning, right? Disciples, these women coming to and finding the empty tomb on Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. That's why we meet on Sundays.
Yeah,
and so I'm a big proponent of meeting on Sundays.
So you're saying if a church is meeting on Saturday nights, they're in sin?
No, I'm not. I wouldn't go that far. Okay. But I would say I have a deep preference for Sunday morning worship.
Yeah, I think there's a good scriptural precedent for that. And I think from what I understand, you probably know more about this in terms of the church history angle than I do, but my understanding is that the early Christians – they met on Sunday mornings. Now, Sunday was not a day off in the Roman calendar.
That's right. Yeah.
And so they would meet before dawn, so as not to interrupt the sort of normal work day of
the economic goings-on of the Roman Empire.
So they would meet early in the morning before the start of the day, which to be honest, I'm grateful that we're able to meet a little bit later on Sunday mornings. Don't have to do the pre-dawn thing. I'm appreciative of that. But I do think there's an intentional I don't know if the word is symbolism, but an intentional patterning in the New Testament.
Yeah, I think a rhythm of Sunday morning for sure.
So having made the caveat that every Sunday is Resurrection Sunday, at the same time, I think it's right for us to set aside one particular Sunday of the year to celebrate with even more intentionality both the death and the resurrection of Jesus. That makes sense to do that. So there's sort of that both-and dynamic there, I think.
And how do we determine that date each year? Do you remember? I looked it up at one point. I'm not totally certain. Because I know like the church history date that like was assigned to like Christ's death and resurrection, whether it's actually that true day, we don't know. That'd be March 25th was his death.
That's the church calendar assigned.
Yes.
I don't think historically that's correct.
I think it's like the first week of April sometime. Is that right?
Well, it depends on whether you think Jesus was crucified in the year 30 A.D. or 33 A.D.
Okay.
Because the date differs then.
Sure.
I want to say that if he was crucified in the year I forget. It might be like April 4th. April 3rd or April 4th is one of the days.
Somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah. In any case, the Western Church and the Eastern Church differ on this one as well in terms of how they set the date for celebrating. I think it has something to do with the day, like the Sunday after like the first full moon or something. I think there's some link to the moon somewhere in there. I'm not sure.
We just know it pops up on our Google Calendar each year that this is Easter.
Yeah. And this year feels like it's on the later side. So because it floats. Like it can be as early as late March or as late as, mid-April.
Yeah.
So it kind of floats in there. in any case. So I wanted to talk a little bit about resurrection in just in terms of biblical theology and even just some specific texts. I'll do a little plug here on the other podcast that I do with Ben Glad. We did
your Mistress podcast.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yes, the Biblical Theology Briefing. I'm sure he'll love being referred to as my mistress. We did a whole 55 minutes on biblical resurrection and biblical theology and that sort of stuff. So, I'm sure I'll touch on some of the same points here, but you want to check that out for a lot more depth and breadth as well. But have you ever had the chance to preach any of sort of the classic resurrection texts? So you think of like the gospel accounts and then maybe like 1 Corinthians 15. Those tend to be kind of like the classic resurrection texts that you hear.
Yeah, no. I have not. I imagine you have.
Yeah, so I've preached Matthew 28. I've preached let's see here. I've preached a chunk or two of Luke 24. I haven't preached Mark's account, and I haven't preached John's account. I've preached a couple of chunks of 1 Corinthians 15 as well. So several of them, not all of them.
Would you count Romans 6 in classic resurrection? I mean, dipping into it a little bit.
Yeah, that's more direct application than it is describing the event.
Yeah.
That's more what I'm thinking of.
Okay.
So that's how I'm kind of limiting this class.
This is your limiting principle.
Exactly. But yeah, I think all of Romans 6 talks about it in a very applicational sense, and you get references to it all throughout the New Testament.
Yeah.
Almost in passing as sort of like the foundation of other realities.
Well, where do you want to start? Where do you want to go to a passage here? Or do you?
Well, I was thinking it might be helpful to talk a little about resurrection in the Old Testament.
Okay.
Because I think some people might have the misperception that resurrection is just a New Testament thing. Or even you might have some folks who are like, well, there are a few texts in the Old Testament that mention resurrection. And a lot of it just depends on, again, what are your criteria? So I would say that the most direct statements in the Old Testament regarding resurrection are found probably in these 3 or 4 texts. I would go with Isaiah 26. There's a very clear reference there.
Okay.
There is the Ezekiel 37 passage, the dry bones.
Valley of dry bones, yep.
And then Daniel 12. Daniel 12 is probably the clearest and most explicit, though I would note that Daniel 12 has language in there that's actually alluding back to Isaiah 53.
So a little Old Testament use of the Old Testament there.
And so I think in Isaiah 53, the logic of the passage demands resurrection, even though it doesn't use that language. You also have Hosea 6, which is another one where it's sort of the explicit reference to resurrection. But what I think the point that I would want to stress here is that the Old Testament has a lot more to say about resurrection than just those, say, 3 or 4 or even 5 what we might call proof texts.
Yeah.
And in fact, part of what's interesting is that when Jesus is having his debate with the Sadducees about the resurrection, he doesn't go to any of those like so-called obvious texts. He goes to Exodus 3. So this is in Luke 20 where he's arguing with the Sadducees about the resurrection, and Jesus basically says, but that the dead are raised, Moses showed this in the passage about the bush. God appearing to Moses in the burning bush. And then he says, he quotes Exodus 3:6, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Jesus looks at that and goes basically, he's the God of the living, not of the dead. So that basically proves the resurrection. And, we can debate about Jesus hermeneutics all you want, but, I'm not going to
He's a tough guy to question.
I'm not really going to be the guy that's like, nah, Jesus, I'm sorry. I just don't think you handled that text properly.
I just don't think the Hebrew points to that.
I just don't. Yeah. That's just not going to pass our Hebrew exegesis requirements here. I'm sorry.
What lens are you using?
Yeah. So it's striking that basically I think the logic behind his reference there is him saying, look, God made covenant promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they died before they were fulfilled. So the logic seems to be he must be going to raise them from the dead in order for them to experience the fulfillment of those promises. And there's a similar logic that the author of Hebrews uses in his epistle or letter or written out sermon or whatever we're calling that these days. So I think those realities should clue us into there's a lot more about resurrection in the Old Testament than a sort of quick surface level, let's do a word search for resurrection and come up with our 4 texts. So,
although it may only be explicitly mentioned those times, the concept of it is much deeper throughout the Old Testament.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really fascinating is in Hebrews when it talks about Abraham nearly sacrificing Isaac. Basically, what the author of Hebrews does is he looks at that and says, Abraham concluded that if necessary, God would raise Isaac from the dead. You're like, whoa. Like he is clearly reading between the lines. And then he says, and basically in a figure of speech, he did receive him back from the dead because he was literally at the point of no return when the angel says to Abraham, stop, right? So for all intents and practical purposes, from Abraham's perspective, he had already decided, I'm going to kill my son. And only at that point does the angel step in and say, no, don't do it. So in effect, in Abraham's mind, his son is basically dead.
As good as
dead.
Yeah.
And he stopped. And so you see the author of Hebrews doing that. And I think there's also plenty of these sort of death and resurrection type motifs throughout the Old Testament.
Well, one that comes to mind is Jonah.
Yeah.
Right. Jonah is thrown over the side of this boat. Mm-hmm. I imagine anticipates dying.
Yeah.
Is swallowed up by the great fish.
Yep.
And is in there for a few days, 3 days.
Yeah.
And then is vomited back out onto the earth.
Yeah.
And goes this kind of a death and resurrection experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although not a literal death.
Correct.
Right? But correct. Sort of foreshadowing. I mean, is it Matthew's gospel that says
12,
says this is the sign of Jonah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or even think about Joseph. He is sold into slavery and then presented as dead to his dad, right? Yeah. His brothers come along and say, we found this coat. Is it his? And it's got blood all over it. And,
Is that his name on the tag?
Right. And so as far as Jacob, his dad, is concerned, he is dead.
His son is gone.
He's dead, gone. Mm-hmm. And then he miraculously appears alive years later, and not just alive in some sort of basic sense, but like ruling.
Yeah.
He's second in command over
a
Egypt.
kingdom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, he experiences a sort of death and even multiple forms of it when you think about it. He's thrown into the pit. They're going to kill him. They sell him into slavery. He gets sold to Potiphar's house. Then the wife makes a false accusation. He's thrown into the pit for prison again, left for, forgotten about. And so, you see these sort of death and resurrection-like experiences, all obviously, I think, pointing forward to obviously the reality that's going to come to pass with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes, I think we've adequately said that the Old Testament has resurrection in a lot of ways baked in.
Yes,
has that concept really, really in its fiber. It's there.
Yes, yeah. One common critical view is that this idea of resurrection is a later developing doctrine within the Old Testament because the Jews were suffering in exile in Babylon, and they had to come up with some sort of way of processing and still believing that God would be faithful to his promises. And based on influences from other religions around them, they came up with this idea of resurrection. And that's just not true when you understand what the New Testament authors look back at and see in the Old Testament as pointing forward when it comes to resurrection. So I think those are some helpful realities to keep in mind, to wrestle with. One thing that's been on my mind this week has been, since I'm preaching this text in chapel this week.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. You're in chapel.
Is Isaiah 53. And just the logic of that great, we think about it as the suffering servant passage, as the passage that talks about Jesus suffering and death, and obviously, yes and amen. But when you look at the end of that text, when you look at the end of Isaiah 53, the logic of it only works if the servant is not just executed, is not just killed, but is resurrected. The logic doesn't work otherwise. So it looks like you got it pulled up there. Why don't you read Isaiah 53, 10 through 12?
Sure, 10 through 12. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoils with the strong. Because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors, yet he bore the sins of many and makes intercession for the transgressors.
Yeah. So really the logic doesn't work if there's not resurrection and vindication there.
Yeah, you can't both have died and suffered and make intercession.
And see his offspring, prolong his days, him seeing and being satisfied, him having God divide a portion for him with the many. Like all of those things have to be happening to a person who's alive. It doesn't make sense otherwise. And so even within what we look at as the suffering servant passage has embedded within it the logic of resurrection. Otherwise, that last portion of it makes no sense.
And what day is that in chapel this week? Is that Thursday?
Thursday.
Okay, and our listeners could live stream that if they wanted to.
They could.
Grace Chapel is live streamed 10:30 that starts?
10:30 Eastern time.
Eastern Standard Time.
Yes, and those are archived up on YouTube. So even if you can't live stream it, you can go back and watch it at your convenience.
Yeah.
So that'll be this Thursday. But so I think I know one of the challenges for pastors as they think about Easter sermons, you feel the pressure of, well, gosh, I get them I get them 2 times a year. I get them at Christmas and I get them at Easter.
Yep.
So they can feel like they have to say everything about the resurrection, which can feel overwhelming.
Yeah,
and unnecessary.
Yeah.
You can't. So you want to make the gospel clear, absolutely. But I think as you think about what texts you can be pointing to, referencing, even preaching, I would encourage pastors to think more broadly beyond just the 4 gospel accounts or 1 Corinthians 15. Those are great texts, but there are ways to point to the resurrection outside of those texts. And I think helping people to see how the resurrection of Jesus is not just a sort of isolated event, but it's really the start of the new creation. It's the culmination of God fulfilling his promises of bringing a serpent crusher who defeats death itself, and God vindicating his servant and us sharing in that vindication and the new life that comes from that.
Yeah. Providing that way of the new life is a big comment Romans 6 makes for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
well, you ready to do resources?
Yeah, we can do that. So, we've got listed here about 7 years ago now. I appeared on the Desiring God podcast and did a little blurb, about a 10-minute blurb on 10 ways Easter changes everything.
I remember that. I remember when you did that.
So we'll have a link to that in the notes. Ben Glad and I wrote a book called Making All Things New, Inaugurated Eschatology for the Life of the Church. Ben has a good chapter on living the Christian life in light of the resurrection in there. If you're looking for probably the most exhaustive defense of the physical bodily resurrection of Jesus, look no further than the 1,000-page tome of N.T. Wright, The Resurrection of the Son of God.
Great for planes, great for trains.
And probably automobiles as well.
Yeah, really small, compact size book.
And then this is brand new. Jeff Brannon wrote a book, The Hope of Life After Death, A Biblical Theology of Resurrection. That's in the Essential Studies in Biblical Theology series. That's the same series that my Rebels and Exiles is in. So that's worth checking out as well. So those would be some great places to check. So, all right, John, we got to move on to this day in sports history.
All right, this day in sports history, April 4th, 2023. Also my wife's birthday tomorrow.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, happy birthday to her.
Happy birthday, Andrea.
Yeah.
You
got
right.
big plans to celebrate that? I know she's not like make a big deal of me, big fuss kind of person.
No, she wants to get takeout, so we're going to pick up some food. She wants chocolate chip cookies, so we're going to get some chocolate chip cookies for her.
So no cake.
No, she went back. She went back and forth between cookies and cake, and I think she's in a cookies mood. Although that could change.
I see.
And I also give her the option: do you want me to buy a cake, or do you want me to make a cake? And she went back and forth on that for a while, but I think ultimately landed on she wants me to make her cookies. So
okay, see, I don't do either of those things. I do buy a cake. Yeah. There's a. You've probably heard the story.
Oh, absolutely! Yes. I've heard the story many times.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that is in my skill set. I'm decently handy at those things.
I probably could I think I could probably follow the directions and make a cake.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be honest. Is it going to be any good? Probably not. So why not just get something she's going to like?
She asked me one year to make tiramisu.
Oh.
And I said no. I said I don't think I can pull that off. I can go buy you some tiramisu. So there is limits that I do put on that. But April 4th, 2023, 1937, fourth Augusta National Invitational Tournament, known as today as the Masters.
That's correct.
Byron Nelson wins his first of 5 major titles by 2 strokes ahead of a fellow named Ralph.
What's his last name, John?
Gouldal.
Sure.
You don't know how to pronounce it either.
I don't know either. Nope.
By the way, Danny in Ohio says this is his favorite segment. He's listening to me try to pronounce these names.
There you go.
1974, Hank Aaron ties Babe Ruth's home run record by hitting his 714th home run in Cincinnati, facing Jack Billingham.
Yeah.
Did I get that last name right? Billingham?
Sure. Makes sense to me.
It looked right. 1983, 45th NCAA. This isn't the Christian version.
Yeah.
Men's basketball champion. North Carolina State beats Houston 54-52. Boy, that's a high-scoring game. Wolfpack wins with buzzer-beating dunk by Lorenzo Charles off a desperation 30-foot shot from Derek Wittenberg.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah. You've seen this clip.
I'm sure I have.
It's iconic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's iconic, for the shot because it was a major upset. Houston was the better team. And then part of what's iconic about it is Jim Valvano, the coach for North Carolina State, afterwards, he's literally running around on the court like a crazy man, looking for somebody to hug, and all his players are like hugging each other and celebrating, and he's running around like this crazy man, like, where's somebody to give a hug? And so, of course, Valvano went on to become even more famous, of course, because of his connection with cancer research and then passing away from.
Yeah, Jimmy V, right?
Yep.
Is what they.
Yep.
1988, the 50th NCAA Men's Basketball Championship. Kansas beats Oklahoma 83-79. The Jayhawks power forward Danny Manning, named not Danny in Ohio, named tournament's most outstanding player.
Yeah, the mop.
The mop.
Yeah.
Now, is it the whole tournament or is it the Final Four?
It's the whole tournament, but inevitably it's going to go to somebody on the –
because they just play the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that team was known as Danny and the Miracles.
Oh.
Because Kansas came into that tournament not necessarily expected to make a deep run.
2005, the 67th NCAA Men's Basketball Tournament Championship game. North Carolina beats Illinois 75-70.
Yep.
The Tar Heels, fourth national championship. That Illinois team was very, very good.
Yeah, they had one loss going into that championship
Very, very good.
against Ohio State, by the way.
Really?
Ohio
so
State was
really this is Ohio State's national championship is really what we're saying
No,
here.
that was a great team, though. They were a lot of fun to watch. And I was a little surprised they lost in the title game.
2016, the 78th NCAA. We're running into a lot of the same thing here.
This is the last one.
Men's Basketball Championship. Villanova defeats North Carolina 77-74. The Wildcats guard Phil Booth has 20 points.
Yes, though that game will be remembered for that was won on a buzzer beater. Villanova had a significant lead. Carolina fought all the way back, tied it on this like double clutch, like 3-point shot, and then Villanova came down, and I think his name's Chris Jenkins, hit a 3-pointer at the buzzer for Villanova to win the game. So very, again, one of those iconic moments in NCAA tournament history there.
Very exciting. All right, what do you like?
Well, if we had a better Masters one, and maybe next week we'll have one for the Masters that's better. So I got to go with, I think, an NCAA tournament basketball one.
Oh, you don't like Henry Aaron here?
Well, I feel like we do that a lot. Like,
really?
Well, I think Hank Aaron, Wilt Chamberlain, Michael Jordan, you get a lot of these guys who did everything.
I feel way more about that than I do Hank Aaron.
Yeah.
Way more about Michael Jordan. Way more about.
Okay. You want to go with Hank? I like Hammer and Hank.
I like Hank Aaron. I'm a fan. But if you want to go with an NCAA, I mean, we only get NCAA tournaments once a year, right? I mean, it's not like they in an off year they have one in October we're going to get or something like that.
Yeah. I'll go with Hank. I like Hank. I think when you look back historically at the grace he demonstrated in handling beating Babe Ruth's record, handling the death threats and all of that around him, and just he's always just struck me as a guy who was not drawing attention to himself, just went out and did his thing and was amazing at it.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to celebrate Hank there. One thing you liked?
All right. So my one thing, we've already been talking about it quite a bit, but being out at Greenville Grace in Ohio, I spoke at their winter retreat for their youth and then preached on Sunday morning. Great people. Andrea and I felt so welcomed, and we got to hang out with Danny in Ohio and his wife, and that was a great time, and get to know their youth pastor there, Ben, who is like 6'4". I mean, he's just a lot of human going on there, and had a great time with their church. They were so gracious and so kind, and they put up with me for 4 sessions. Which was probably the most gracious thing they did all weekend.
Yeah, bully for them. All right. I'm going to go with a podcast. It's called The Deck Investigates. Have you heard about this?
No.
They did a 15-episode series on an unsolved murder in Argus, Indiana, which is like 15 minutes away. Well, more like 20 to 25 minutes away from here.
What direction?
West.
Okay.
So an unsolved murder from 1984.
So like out near Plymouth area.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Towards Plymouth and Rochester in that direction.
Really?
Yes. So you should check it out. You like true crime stuff.
I like some true crime stuff. Yeah.
It's pretty well done. And it's, there's always just an interesting sort of ring to it when they're talking about towns. Like, yeah, they headed out of town and headed towards Plymouth or headed towards – like, I know where those places are. Like, I know what road they're talking about.
Let me tell you, I am still waiting for a podcast about Al Capone's connection to this area. Like, there are speakeasies in Warsaw that Al Capone frequented.
Yes.
And I would love to hear a podcast about some of those stories.
Well, and the Barbie Hotel.
The Barbie Hotel nearby.
Which has great deep dish pizza.
Mm-hmm. Great deep dish. And apparently Al Capone would invite people down and rent out the whole hotel and invite one person. And that person would not return to Chicago. Right. Because they love the area just so much.
Yeah.
They just decided to stay
absolutely.
Permanently.
So
at the bottom of the lake.
Yes. Yeah, who knows how many bodies are down there. Anyway, on that cheery note, we have talked NCAA tournament basketball. We have talked the resurrection of Jesus. We have talked Hank Aaron. We have talked about your trip to Ohio. And we've talked about a podcast that I've been enjoying. And so I think by definition, we have covered our various and sundry things. And all that's left to say is, until next time, the Lord bless y'all real good.
Later.